The first snow that stuck came softly, as if the sky had been holding its breath all December, and finally let it out in a long, relieved exhale. It gathered on the power lines like sugared lace and turned the asphalt of Maple Street into a narrow, silent river of white. The wreaths on the lampposts glowed a little brighter under it, and even the battered mailbox outside the hardware store seemed dignified. Shoulders squared beneath its new winter coat. From the steamed-over window of the Maple Brew, Emma Rose watched the town slow to the pace of falling flakes. She pressed her knuckles around a mug to herd the heat into her fingers. Then she lifted the mug for a sip and tasted cinnamon and orange peel. It was the drink she made every year when the snow started to stick, a tradition she'd invented for herself in high school, when she'd first gotten the job and never had the heart to retire. Her mother said the blend smelled like Christmases from years when money was not the loudest voice in the room. Emma's reflection in the glass was a smudge, the sweep of a wool beanie tugged down to her eyebrows, a hint of brown braid resting on her shoulder. Two eyes that tried to look awake after an early shift and a night of light sleep. The string of tiny copper lights she had twisted around the window frame threw soft halos into the fogged pane. And outside, two kids in marshmallow coats pushed at each other and collapsed into laughter. Beyond them, the town's Christmas tree, installed a week ago and decorated by half the PTA, swayed just enough to reveal a missing strip of tinsel Emma had promised Mrs. Barnaby she'd fix. She had not yet fixed it. There had been other things. "Em," called Mr. Whitaker, the owner, from the back. "You good out there?" "All good," she said, because good was a habit easier than honesty. She was down to 3 gingerbread men and an empty tip jar at 10 in the morning, the quiet before the lunch rush, and her thoughts were doing that end-of-year arithmetic she hated. November's rent had settled on time, but December's was waiting with arms crossed. The pharmacy's white bag with her mother's pills sat under the register. She'd pick it up after her shift with the money from last night's pie orders. She'd stretch and juggle and borrow from a later self, the way she always did. It wasn't noble. It was simply what the days demanded. The bell above the door jingled and let in a gasp of cold. A man stepped through, shaking snow from his shoulders. He wasn't from town. She could tell by the way he paused 2 steps in and took the place in with a curious, deliberate sweep, as if checking a map for landmarks. The chalkboard menu, the shelf with battered second-hand novels, the corner table where the retired mail carrier. Mr. Dunn played chess against himself. Most locals didn't look at the Maple Brew like that. They lived inside its map and reached for things on muscle memory. He took off his cap and shrugged out of his coat without a hurry. He had the kind of face that grew more interesting the longer you looked at it. Quiet eyes framed by lashes that would have been wasted in a hurry, a mouth made for half smiles. A camera hung at his chest, unzipped despite the snow. The camera told her he was one of those people who came through Maple Falls. Tourists with leaf peeper hearts. Artists who wanted one good winter shot before the season turned the roads treacherous. The town knew how to be looked at. It wore its old brick buildings like a coat that had been patched too many times to be fashionable, and exactly enough times to be beloved. "Morning," Emma said. "What can I get you?" He scanned the menu, the chalkboard print of her hand steady and neat after years of practice, and then he looked back at her, as if reading a menu were a negotiation he wanted to keep simple. "Hi, morning. What do you recommend for someone who's still thawing?" "Depends if you want to feel your face in the next 10 minutes, she said, and started listing off options about latte versus drip versus the chai they made with real ginger root. He listened with his whole face the way good listeners did, as if what she knew could be a gift. "I'll try the... What did you call it? Winter House?" "Winter House," she said, a little embarrassed suddenly by the name that had felt charming on paper. "Cinnamon, orange peel, a little clove. Milk if you want." "Perfect," he said. "And this is going to sound like a tourist being a tourist. But do you happen to know if the big tree is lit at night?" "Every night," she said. 6 o'clock. "Unless a storm knocks things out. Even then we light the half that still works." "Optimism." He smiled for real at that, slow and grateful. "Optimism," he echoed. and Emma felt the words settle into the room like a log dropped onto the coals. "Name for the cup?" she asked, and he hesitated just long enough that she wondered if he had complicated feelings about names. Some people did. Before he said, "Lucas?" "Emma," she said, because manners were the only currency that didn't run out when you spent it. She turned to the espresso machine, tamped, pulled, steamed. She could make the winter house blindfolded, and sometimes when the lights flickered, she just about did. He watched the process, but not in the hovering way that made her want to turn her shoulders away. More like a painter watching someone frame a canvas. He took a couple of photos while she poured the milk, the shutter a whisper. "You from the city?" she asked over the hiss of steam. "New York," he said, "but I grew up outside Albany." "This is a familiar kind of winter, familiar and relentless," she said, and he laughed softly. She liked that sound, mostly because it wasn't loud. The Maple Brew wasn't the kind of place that did well with loud. It stored things, names, stories, lost gloves, like a church store's hymns. She slid his drink across the counter. He sipped it and closed his eyes. "Okay," he said. "You could bottle this and sell it to weather forecasters. Then who would come here because they had to?" she said and nodded toward Mr. Dunn's corner. "That would put Mr. Dunn out of a social life." Lucas moved to the table by the window, the one with the best view of the snow's choreography. He set his camera down with care and took a notebook out of his bag. He wrote something down. He looked up again to catch the world in the act of being itself. He took a quiet photo of his own hands cupping the mug, the foam blooming into the kind of heart that always surprised her when it showed up under her fingers. Emma wiped down the counter again, because busy hands were easier than busy thoughts. Her phone buzzed on the shelf with the pill bag. Ma flashed on the screen. She hesitated. She had a rule about phones on shift, but rules bent easily in winter. She answered and tucked the phone under her chin. "Hey, Ma." "Em." Her mother's voice was warm but thin, the radiator in their apartment on Granger Avenue, trying. "Don't worry, I'm fine. Just wanted to remind you about the pills," Emma said. "Already got them. I'll be home around 4. Don't rush on the ice." "Promise nothing," Emma said, hoping to make her mother smile through the line. It was a joke they'd had since the year her mother taught her to drive in snow in the Safeway parking lot. Fear lived in a lot of rooms, but humor got to sit on the couch. "Did I hear sleigh bells?" her mother asked. "Just the bell on the door," Emma said. "We're festive on a budget." When she hung up, the cafe was louder. A pair of teachers on their prep period came in, then a delivery guy with shoulders rounded against the cold. Emma moved through them, a short, easy dance she knew by heart, while the snow kept lowering the town's voice. She caught Lucas looking at the chalkboard again, as if measuring the distance between the word clove and the first time he'd tasted it. He met her eyes and lifted the mug in thanks. By lunchtime, the sky had closed over completely. People came in red-cheeked and left steaming, and the cafe smelled like sugar and coffee and wool. Mrs. Barnaby swept through in a coat that looked like a cranberry sauce accident and left with 3 scones, reminding Emma about the tinsel on the tree in a voice that made it sound like a medical emergency. "I'll fix it after my shift," Emma promised. "Scout's honor." "You were never a scout," Mr. Whitaker said after Mrs. Barnaby left. "I have the spirit," Emma said, and he snorted. By 2, the rush had thinned. 2 teenagers in the corner edited a TikTok of themselves flopping into snowbanks. A couple from the bed and breakfast stared at the tourist map, like it might confess secrets if they were patient. Lucas had filled a page with notes. When he stood and came up to the counter, Emma felt absurdly aware of the flower on her cuff. "I was thinking," he said, "if it doesn't creep you out that a stranger asks, could I take a portrait of you sometime? For a series I'm doing on small-town winters. Not now, not staged. Just when you're doing what you do." Emma blinked. People had taken photos of her before, candids on hometown Instagram accounts. A shot for the Maple Brew's website when Mr. Whitaker decided to get modern. But no one had asked in that way. Like asking permission meant more than the photo. "I don't know," she said, honest because she didn't know how to be anything else. "I'm not super photogenic. Everyone who thinks that has just been on the wrong side of the lens at the wrong moment," he said. "No pressure. If you ever want to." "Okay," she said, filing the word away like she filed receipts. "We'll see." He nodded and tucked a small card under the tip jar. Lucas Brown. It read in simple type with an email and a website she would click later, and then judge herself for clicking. When he put his coat back on, he paused at the door and looked out at the snow as if deciding something important. Then he braced himself and went out. By 3:30, the light had started to fade, a quick January trick that never got less rude. The teachers returned to their students. The couple from the bed and breakfast asked what time the tree lit up. 6, Emma said, even if only half. And Mr. Dunn put away his chessboard with a sigh of magnanimity toward a world that would never beat him, because he played both sides. Emma flipped the sign to closed at 4, grabbed the bag from the pharmacy, the bag with a loaf of day-old bread Mr. Whitaker had insisted she take, and stepped into an evening that smelled like iron and wood smoke. The cold chose its way down her collar with greedy fingers. She tugged her beanie lower and started down Maple toward Granger. Citizens of the town emerged from rooms like actors summoned on cue. A woman scraping her windshield with a credit card. A man walking a golden retriever, who was certain its job was to rescue every snowman's fallen carrot nose. The tree loomed ahead, sensible and gaudy all at once. She had meant to fix the tinsel. She had not fixed the tinsel. She cut through the park, boots crunching, and that was when she saw him. At first she thought it was a pile of coats someone had abandoned on the bench. A bulky brown thing hunched under the pine. Then the pile moved and a small face tilted up, and a pair of eyes met hers, wide and careful as a deer's. A dog's ear appeared. Then the rest of the dog, a pit mix puppy patched in black and white, ribs visible beneath a too thin coat, a pink tongue lolling in a face that wanted to trust and had not yet decided if it could. Hey, Emma said, because when you don't know which word to start with, hey holds your place in the sentence. You okay? The boy looked about 8, though Emma had learned you could be older than your face if you'd been asked to carry too much. His coat was 2 sizes too big, the cuffs slick with old salt. He held the leash loop like a talisman. Snow had gathered in the boy's lashes, and he blinked it away without using his hands as if he'd practiced. We're fine, he said, the we a small fierce thing. Just resting. The puppy wagged as if to validate the statement. Emma glanced around. There were footprints in the snow leading from the sidewalk to the bench, and a hollow place where someone might have sat for a while. The winter light made everything look gentler than it was. Do you live nearby? She asked. The boy shook his head. We're looking, he said with a dignity that made her chest hurt. My name is Oliver. This is Star. He patted the puppy's head. She looks like a star when the streetlight hits her. See? Emma followed his pointing finger. The patch of white on the puppy's forehead did catch the weak light like a star that had gotten lost and decided to make itself useful anyway. She crouched, ignoring the ice settling into her jeans. Hi, Star, she said, and let the puppy sniff her knuckles. Star decided quickly and licked her hand, tail waggling hard enough to dislodge snow from the bench. I'm Emma, she said to the boy. Do you need help, Oliver? It's getting colder. We're okay, he said again, and then in a quieter voice. We were going to see if the church had room, but there's a sign that says they're not open till morning. Miss Kay at the diner gave us a burger earlier. He said it like a recitation of facts, not a plea. Emma stood, and the world tilted a fraction, the way it always did when a decision her body had already made caught up to her mind. She had a mother with a heart that needed careful shepherding through a winter like this. She had rent and hours and more hours. She had a small 1-bedroom with radiators that hissed like old cats, and a couch that pulled out into a bed if you coaxed it. She had soup in the fridge that could add 2 bowls without ruining its balance. Come on, she said, and held out her hand to Oliver as if they had known each other longer than a minute. Let's get you warm first. There's a couch at my place that thinks it's a guest room. We'll call around after dinner. Figure out what makes sense. Oliver examined her hand with solemn care, as if there might be an exam later. He looked toward the church, then down at Star, then back at Emma. We don't want to be trouble. You'll be company, she said. There's a difference. He set his small palm in her glove, and the dog rose, shaking a snow halo into the air. The 3 of them walked together across the park, Star's paws unsure on the ice, Oliver taking smaller steps to match the dog's learning. Emma pointed out the tree and confessed to the tinsel situation. Oliver nodded as if she had admitted to a shared secret. When they turned onto Granger, the wind took a playful swipe at them and then thought better of it. Emma's building was red brick and sensible. The front steps shoveled by a landlord who believed in appearances if not prompt plumbing repairs. On the landing, she balanced the pharmacy bag on her knee to unlock the door, and they tumbled into the small square of warmth like a trio returning from a voyage. The radiator breathed. The living room was tidy in the way small spaces are, when there's no room for a mess to stretch out. A string of paper stars hung across the window. Old book pages folded and stitched with red thread. The kind of decoration you make when you want Christmas to come without a bill attached. Shoes by the rug, she said, because even in emergencies the house had its rules. Star gets the towel treatment. Star submitted to the towel with the grateful abandon of the very young. When Emma looked up, her mother was in the doorway to the bedroom, hair wrapped in a scarf, sweater zipped to her chin, eyebrows lifted in question, and then, when she took in the scene, in amusement. "Guests?" her mother said. "Is this a hotel that charges in chores?" "This is Oliver and Star," Emma said. "They are paying in good company. Best currency," her mother said. She leaned on the doorframe, put a hand to her chest for a moment the way she did when she measured breath against a day. "Welcome, Oliver." "Hello, Star, I'm Lila." Oliver nodded with grave formality. "Thank you for letting us be here," he said. And then, after a pause that sounded like trust being tested and finding something solid, "We can help. I can chop vegetables. Star can provide moral support," Star wagged. Emma laughed, and the laugh loosened something tight in her. "Moral support is our favorite," she said. "I've got soup on deck and bread that wants to be rescued with butter," while water warmed on the stove, and the puppy explored the perimeter of a life that smelled like clean laundry and cinnamon. Emma reached for her phone. She texted Mr. Whitaker to say she'd be late in the morning, just in case the night turned into something else. She searched for shelters and church hotlines, for the names of volunteers whose numbers were written on the bulletin board at the post office. Most numbers sent her to polite recorded voices that said, "We're closed. Please leave a message." She left messages that sounded like please, and when she hung up the last call, she found Oliver at the window, looking out through the paper stars at the evening gathering itself against the glass. "Do you always make stars?" he asked without turning. His voice had softened in the heat, the way ice gets plush before it melts. "Every year," Emma said, ladle suspended over the soup. "From thrift store books no one reads anymore. Feels like giving them a second life." Oliver nodded. "They look like wishes," he said. "If you hang wishes where you can see them, sometimes they remember where to land." Emma thought about rent and pills and the tinsel she still hadn't fixed, and something in her chest answered yes, in a language that didn't need words. She set bowls on the table and tore the bread and called them to sit. Oliver washed his hands with the thoroughness of someone taught to be a good guest. Star got her dinner in a borrowed mixing bowl and ate as if every bite might argue successfully with the winter. "Tomorrow," Lila said, spoon cradled in her fingers. "We'll call again. Someone always picks up eventually." "Thank you," Oliver said. And they started to eat. And the soup showed up as more than food. It showed up as hospitality, which is the art of telling someone with carrots and broth that they're not alone. They were halfway through seconds when the power flickered once and held, like a cough that decides not to become a cold. The three of them looked up in the same moment, and then they laughed at the coincidence of their heads turning together. After dinner, Emma found a blanket that had belonged to her grandmother and shook it out for Oliver on the couch. She set out a spare pillow, tucked the edges around his small body the way you do when you remember being held like that yourself. "Do you want a nightlight on?" she asked. "I'm okay," he said. He was quiet for a moment, hands folded on top of the blanket like a photograph of a grown man at rest. "Miss Emma?" She looked up from the sink where she was stacking bowls. The faucet's hiss steady. "Yes? Do you ever feel like the world gets too quiet and then the quiet is the loudest thing?" His voice wasn't afraid so much as curious, as if he were describing a season and wanted to know the name for it. "All the time," she said, "because lying in small things begets lies in larger ones. But then something small makes a noise. A spoon on a plate, a dog sighing, snow hitting the window, and the quiet remembers how to share." Star sighed on cue from her commandeered spot on the rug, and they both smiled. Emma turned off the sink. Outside, the town's tree had found its 6 o'clock and glowed against the blue, a stubborn constellation domesticating the dark. Emma remembered the missing tinsel and felt a small, ridiculous flush of shame. She went to the window. The paper stars trembled in the slight draft, faintly luminous in the tree's reflection. "Good night." "Oliver," she said. "Good night," he said, and then, so softly Emma thought she might have imagined it, "Thank you for making room." Later, when the apartment had settled into its night noises, the radiator's complaining lullaby, the wind coaxing the window to tell secrets, Emma lay awake for a while and counted backwards from the day. How a man with a camera had said optimism like a promise. How a boy had named a dog after a star and made it true. How soup could be more than soup. The arithmetic of the month still waited, but it waited outside the door for once. On the coffee table, under the curve of the lamp, Oliver's small hand had left a folded scrap of paper. Emma noticed it when she crossed the living room to turn off the light. It was a star, simple and exact, folded from the brown bag Mr. Whitaker used for muffins. In the middle, in careful printing, someone had written, "For when the quiet is too loud." She didn't know then that the star would glow on a night when the power finally did fail. She didn't know that a picture taken through a window the next day would place her face beside that star in a newspaper and then on gallery walls. She only knew that she cupped the paper in her palm and felt something like warmth, and that outside, the snow continued to fall with the patience of a miracle taking its time. Morning came quietly, wrapped in the pale gold of a sun too shy to climb far above the hills. Maple Street was a painting half finished, rooftops buried under snow, wreaths tilted by the wind, and thin trails of chimney smoke that rose like soft thoughts into the cold sky. In the Rose apartment, the smell of oatmeal, cinnamon, and dog fur filled the small rooms. Star had declared the rug her new kingdom, and snored with the conviction of a creature certain it was loved. Emma stirred the oatmeal, humming under her breath, until she realized the melody matched the carols playing faintly from the neighbor's radio through the wall. She smiled at the coincidence and turned to check on Oliver. The boy was sitting cross-legged by the window, elbows on the sill, watching the sunlight flicker across the paper stars she'd made. He hadn't moved for several minutes. "Hey, stargazer," she said softly. "You hungry?" He nodded without turning. "They look different in the morning," he said. "Like they're remembering what they used to be." Emma walked over, wiping her hands on a towel. "What did they used to be?" "Words," he said. "Someone's stories. Maybe they remember that." She looked at the faded print on the paper, fragments of some forgotten novel. He opened the door to find the world waiting. The line visible on one of the stars made her pause. "Maybe they do," she whispered. Oliver turned then, his eyes bright and steady. "Stars don't forget things," he said matter-of-factly. "They just wait for people to look up." Emma didn't know how to answer that. She only smiled and handed him a bowl of oatmeal. "Eat before it gets cold, philosopher." He grinned, a real child's grin. All gap and sunlight, and the room felt bigger for it. Later, when her mother had taken her medicine and gone to rest, Emma pulled on her boots and coat. "I've got to stop by the cafe," she told Oliver. "Mr. Whitaker will start sending search parties if I don't show up. You can stay here with Mom." Oliver shook his head. "I'll help. Star likes to walk." "Pretty sure Star likes everything," Emma said, but she didn't argue. Something about leaving him behind didn't feel right. Besides, Maple Street was brighter now, busy again, friendly. Maybe that was safer than the silence of empty rooms. They stepped into the morning together. Star bounded ahead, nose buried in every drift, tail cutting joyful arcs in the air. The town was slowly waking, shopkeepers brushing snow from signs, children dragging sleds to the hill behind the library. Emma noticed how Oliver watched it all, not like a tourist, but like someone remembering a story he'd once heard and finally recognized. At the corner, near the church, a man was fixing the broken lights on a nativity scene. The plastic figures, Mary, Joseph, a slightly crooked camel, glowed weakly in the daylight. Oliver stopped to watch. "They look cold," he said. Emma smiled. "That's the funny thing about statues. They can't feel it." He tilted his head. "Maybe they still remember what it's like." She opened her mouth to respond, but closed it again. It wasn't the first time he said something that made her feel like he was older than he seemed. She glanced down. "You think too much for an 8-year-old, he shrugged. "It's a good way not to forget." When they reached the Maple Brew, the bell over the door chimed and warmth rolled out like a welcome. The smell of roasted beans and sugar hit instantly. Mr. Whitaker looked up from the counter, ready to scold, but the words softened when he saw the boy and the puppy. "Well, I'll be," he said. "Starting a daycare, Emma?" "This is Oliver," she said quickly. "And Star, they, needed a warm place last night." Mr. Whitaker's expression shifted through suspicion, curiosity, and something like sympathy. "Long as they don't chew on the furniture." Star wagged as if to promise perfect behavior. Oliver stood straight, polite, hands clasped behind his back. "Thank you, sir," he said. "We can help if you want." Whitaker blinked. "Help?" "I'm good at wiping tables," Oliver said, serious. "And Star is moral support." Whitaker chuckled. "You hiring, Emma?" "He's already got your pitch." "Unpaid internship," Emma said. "Comes with free cookies." "Deal," Whitaker said, shaking his head. The cafe filled slowly as the morning wore on. The air was thick with chatter. Talk of weather, canceled school, and the coming Christmas parade. Lucas showed up just before lunch, camera slung around his neck, his coat dusted with snow again. "Back for optimism?" Emma asked as he came to the counter. "Back for coffee," he said. "Optimism's just the side effect." He smiled when he saw Oliver and knelt slightly. "Hey there, partner." "You helping out?" Oliver nodded. "I'm the assistant." "That's a big job," Lucas said. "Assistants keep the world running." He took out his camera and pointed toward the window, where the reflection of the tree shimmered on the glass. "Do you mind if I take one?" Emma hesitated, but Oliver nodded eagerly. "It's okay. He's good at it." "Professional endorsement," Lucas said. He lifted the camera, the lens catching the light. The click sounded like a heartbeat. He showed them the screen afterward. Emma and Oliver standing near the counter. Star's ears visible in the bottom corner. Snow falling outside in perfect soft focus. "It looks like we live in a snow globe," Emma murmured. "Maybe you do," Lucas said. "Some towns feel like they remember magic." She wanted to say some people too, but instead she turned to refill a pot of coffee. That afternoon, the snow thickened again. Customers lingered longer, unwilling to face the wind. Someone started a story about a blizzard in '94, and soon everyone was sharing worst winter tales. Oliver listened wide-eyed, while Star slept under the counter. At one point, an elderly man dropped his mittens. Oliver picked them up and handed them back without a word. The man smiled, surprised by the small kindness. When the crowd finally thinned, Lucas stayed behind. He sat at the same window table, flipping through his notebook. Emma wiped the counter and glanced over. "You always write that much?" she asked. "Only when the world gives me more than I can keep in my head," he said. "Maple Falls has a lot of that." "You mean coffee?" "I mean people who make it feel like home." She blushed and turned away. "You're just saying that because I remembered the cinnamon." "Maybe," he said, grinning. "Or maybe not," Oliver interrupted by climbing onto a stool, holding something in his hands. A tiny folded paper star. "I made this for you," he said to Lucas. "For your pictures." Lucas blinked, taken off guard. The star was perfect. Crisp folds, careful lines. "Thank you," he said, accepting it gently. "What's it for?" "So you don't forget," Oliver said simply. "When you lose the light, you can use this one." Lucas looked at the boy for a long second, something unreadable flickering in his expression. Then he nodded. "That's a good deal. I'll keep it safe." The day slid into evening. The snow outside glowed blue in the dusk. Mr. Whitaker closed up early. The storm warnings were getting louder on the radio. Lucas offered to walk Emma and Oliver home. The streets were mostly empty, lights blurring through the curtain of snow. They passed the park. The Christmas tree stood defiant, half-lit but beautiful. Emma stopped to fix the missing tinsel. Lucas laughed softly and helped. "Perfectionism?" he teased. "Just promises kept," she said. They reached the building, and Emma thanked him for the company. He hesitated at the door, brushing snow from his coat. "Hey," he said. "If you ever want to see the photos, I could show you tomorrow. Maybe bring some prints by." "I'd like that," she said. And she meant it. That night the storm deepened. The wind prowled around the building like a restless animal. The lights flickered once, twice. Leela was asleep, her breathing slow and steady. Star curled at Oliver's feet, twitching in dream. Emma sat at the small table with a candle burning low, writing a note for Mr. Whitaker about the morning shift. The flame threw soft shadows across the room. Oliver stirred on the couch. "Can't sleep?" she asked. He shook his head. "It's loud outside." "It'll pass," she said. "Storms always do." He sat up, hugging the blanket. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "storms come because someone forgot to believe." Emma looked at him, unsure if he was teasing. "Believe in what?" "In anything," he said, eyes on the flickering candle. "When people stop believing, the world gets cold. The stars get lonely." The way he said it made her skin prickle. She thought of his odd calm, the strange wisdom in his words. "You've got quite an imagination," she said. Oliver smiled faintly. "Maybe, or maybe I just remember things people forget." He reached into his pocket and pulled out another folded paper star. It glimmered faintly in the candlelight, as if dusted with frost. "This one's for you," he said. Emma took it, smiling. "Thank you." "It's beautiful. It's not just paper," he whispered. "It's a wish. You don't have to tell it out loud. Just keep it near." She nodded, a little unsettled but warmed by his sincerity. "Okay, I'll keep it." Outside, the wind moaned along the street, and somewhere a loose shutter clattered. The flame of the candle wavered, and for a heartbeat went out. The room dropped into darkness. "Oh no," Emma muttered, reaching for the matches. Before she found them, a soft glow spread through the room. It wasn't the candle. It was the little paper star in her hand, pulsing gently, like a tiny heartbeat of light. Emma froze. The glow brightened, enough to outline Oliver's small face, calm, serene, eyes reflecting gold. Star lifted her head, tail thumping once, unbothered. "How?" Emma whispered. Oliver smiled. "See? Wishes remember." The light flickered once more, then dimmed to a faint shimmer and went still. The power came back with a click, lamps humming to life. Emma looked down at the now ordinary paper in her palm. "It's just the storm," she said, almost to herself. "Maybe," Oliver said softly. "Or maybe it's Christmas getting ready." Emma lay awake long after Oliver and Star had drifted back into sleep. The star lay on the nightstand beside her phone, no longer glowing but somehow alive, as if it held a breath inside. She thought of all the years she'd stopped expecting miracles, of bills and hospital visits and quiet Decembers. For the first time in a long while, she wondered if maybe the world had never stopped being magical. Maybe people just forgot to notice. She turned off the lamp and listened. The wind had quieted. Outside, the snow fell slower now, each flake shining briefly in the streetlight before vanishing into softness. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour. Emma closed her eyes. She dreamed of a sky full of stars, not cold or far away, but near enough to touch, and one of them, small and warm, falling gently into her hands. The snow came harder that night, as if the sky had decided to bury the town in forgiveness. By 10 o'clock, the streets were ghost roads. Porch lights glowed like lonely beacons. Cars slumbered under white blankets, and even the church bells had fallen quiet. The world, for a moment, seemed made entirely of silence and light. Inside the Rose apartment, the heat wheezed in and out like an old man catching his breath. Emma stood by the window, watching flakes pile against the glass. Star pressed her nose to the pane, whining softly while Oliver sat on the couch, folding another paper star with careful, deliberate hands. "You've made enough to decorate the whole town," Emma said, wrapping her sweater tighter. "Maybe that's the point," Oliver said, not looking up. "Maybe the world needs reminding." "Reminding of what?" "That it's not alone." Emma wanted to laugh softly, not to mock him, but because it sounded like something out of one of her mother's Christmas stories. Instead, she turned away and glanced toward the bedroom. Lila was asleep again, her breathing shallow but steady. The pills helped, but winter always pressed heavy on her heart. Outside, the wind howled like it was alive. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out. For a second, everything was swallowed by dark. The only sound was Star's small whimper, and the sigh of the wind through the cracks in the window frame. Then faintly a golden shimmer began to spread from the coffee table, from the cluster of paper stars Oliver had made. They glowed softly, like embers, painting the room in warm, living light. Emma stared. "Oliver, how—" "It's okay," he said calmly, looking almost older in that light. "It happens when the night gets too dark." She wanted to ask more, but the practical part of her brain, the part that worried about frozen pipes and unpaid bills, clicked back on. "The cafe has a generator," she said quickly. "Mr. Whitaker will need help. If the storm keeps up, people might be stuck out there." Oliver nodded. "We should go." She hesitated, glancing toward her mother. But before she could speak, Lila stirred and opened her eyes. "Go," she murmured weakly. "You can't fight a storm by waiting for it to end. Take the boy, take the dog. Help where you can." Emma kissed her forehead and whispered, "We'll be back before midnight." The streets were almost impassable. Snow stung their faces like cold ash. Oliver held Star in his arms while Emma trudged through knee-deep drifts, her flashlight cutting trembling paths through the white. Buildings loomed like sleeping giants. Somewhere far away, a power line snapped with a sound like breaking glass. When they reached the Maple Brew, Emma's heart squeezed with relief. The windows glowed faintly, candles moving inside like souls. She banged on the door, and a moment later Mr. Whitaker's round silhouette appeared. "Thank heaven," he said as he opened up. "Generator died 20 minutes ago, but we've got candles and coffee. That's something." Inside, the cafe was half lit by the flicker of wax and flame. A handful of townspeople huddled near the counter. Mrs. Barnaby clutching her scarf. A young couple with a baby. 2 delivery drivers who couldn't make it home. Lucas was there too. Camera hanging from his neck, snow melting in his hair. "You made it," he said, stepping forward. His voice carried both surprise and relief. "Couldn't sit and wait," Emma said. "We thought we could help." "Help?" Mrs. Barnaby echoed. "Help how, dear?" Emma smiled faintly. "By doing what we do best, keeping people warm." Within minutes, the coffee machine hissed to life under the flickering candlelight. They found an old camping stove in the storage room, lit it and warmed milk and soup. Lucas filled thermoses. Oliver carried mugs from table to table, and even Star made her rounds, tail wagging, offering comfort with her small, warm presence. The storm outside roared, but inside the Maple Brew, there was laughter, soft at first, then growing, brave enough to fight the wind. At some point, Emma noticed Lucas setting his camera on a chair, snapping quiet pictures, not for art this time, but for memory. He captured faces lit by candles, hands passing mugs, the reflection of snow in the windows. When he turned toward Emma, she was standing by the counter, hair messy from the wind, cheeks flushed from the cold, holding a mug in both hands. He took the shot before she could object. "What are you doing?" She asked, half laughing. "Photographing hope," he said simply. Something in her chest trembled at those words. She looked around, at Oliver chatting with the old mail carrier, at the couple rocking their baby, at Mr. Whitaker humming to himself while stirring cocoa. The whole room looked like the inside of a heartbeat. Round 11, the storm began to quiet. The candles burned lower, the air filled with the smell of wax and coffee. Someone began to sing, a low, wavering voice, maybe Mrs. Barnaby's. "Silent Night." Others joined in, shy at first, then stronger, until the cafe itself seemed to hum. Emma closed her eyes for a moment. She felt something she hadn't felt in years, not just warmth, but peace. It wasn't about perfect trees, gifts, or lights. It was about people, strangers, and keeping each other company in the dark. She turned to look for Oliver, but he wasn't there. "Oliver?" She called softly, no answer. Only the faint scratch of wind against the windows. Lucas looked up. He was just over there by the door. Emma walked quickly through the cafe, heart hammering. "Oliver?" Star trotted after her, nose twitching. Then the dog stopped by the back door and barked once. Emma opened it. The storm had nearly passed. The air outside shimmered faintly. Not with snow this time, but with light. A gentle golden glow hung in the distance, near the old maple tree across the street. She stepped out, snow crunching beneath her boots. The glow pulsed softly, like the heartbeat of the night itself, and standing there at the edge of the street was Oliver. He turned toward her, his small figure haloed by snow and light. The wind didn't seem to touch him anymore. Star barked once, then went quiet, tail low. "Oliver!" Emma called. "You'll freeze." He smiled, the calm, knowing smile she'd seen the night before. "It's okay," he said softly. "It's almost Christmas. I have to go." Her breath caught. "Go where?" "Home," he said simply. "You helped me remember where it is." Tears burned her eyes. "You don't have to. We can find—" But the words fell apart in the snow. The glow around him brightened, spreading outward like sunlight through fog. The paper stars she'd tucked in her coat pocket, the ones he'd made, began to shimmer faintly. As if answering him, he looked at her one last time and said, "Thank you for believing, even when you didn't know you did." And then he was gone. The light faded slowly, leaving only the snow falling soft and endless. Emma stood there for a long time, the paper stars trembling in her hand, star pressed against her leg, whining softly. Lucas came running a moment later, breathless. "Emma, what happened?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were still fixed on the empty street. "He's gone," she whispered. "Gone where?" She shook her head. "Home, I think." They stood there together for a long while, the night quiet around them. Finally, Lucas reached into his pocket and pulled out the little paper star Oliver had given him days before. To Emma's astonishment, it glowed, faint, warm, alive. They exchanged a glance, not of fear but wonder. Lucas exhaled. "You ever feel like some people come into our lives just to remind us what miracles look like?" Emma nodded, eyes shining. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think I just met one." They went back inside, carrying the last of the light with them. The cafe was silent now, the guests asleep, the candles low. Emma placed Oliver's glowing star in the center of the counter. It illuminated the room with a soft, golden pulse. Enough to see by, enough to believe in. Lucas turned off his camera and set it aside. "No photo could capture that," he murmured. Emma smiled faintly. "Then maybe it's not meant to be captured. Maybe it's meant to stay." He looked at her, really looked. And for a moment, the silence between them felt holy. Outside, the storm had stopped. Midnight came quietly, without fireworks or fanfare. Just snow, gentle, endless, falling like blessings over the sleeping town. By the time dawn brushed the horizon, the light in the paper star had faded, but its warmth lingered. Emma sat by the window, star curled at her feet, watching the first pink glow of Christmas morning rise over Maple Street. Lucas dozed in a chair nearby, camera in his lap, the faintest smile on his lips. And in the distance, just for a heartbeat, she thought she saw a small figure standing at the edge of the park, waving, then fading into the morning light. Emma pressed her hand to the window and whispered, "Merry Christmas, Oliver." The snow kept falling, steady and kind, as if the sky itself was smiling back. New Year's morning arrived as if the world had taken a deep, clean breath. The storm had scrubbed Maple Falls to its bones. Rooftops were blank pages, the park a single unbroken sheet of white, and the icicles hanging from the eaves caught the sun like fragile trumpets poised to play. Even the street plows, grumbling through town before dawn, seemed gentler today, leaving neat, navigable corridors through the drifts as if carving out possibilities. Emma Rose woke with the memory of light in her hands. For a beat, she lay very still on the pull-out couch. Lila insisted on giving the bedroom to you. Kids and the dog, which meant Emma had argued, and then given in, and watched the pale gold unfurl along the ceiling. Star lifted her head, blinked at the brightness, and thumped her tail once in a sleepy greeting. In the chair by the window, Lucas had drifted into whatever light sleep photographers kept for themselves, chin tucked, camera strap still looped around his wrist as if he feared the night might steal it while he dreamed. "Happy New Year," Emma whispered to the room. Testing the words, Lucas stirred, rubbed his eyes, and smiled at her in a way that made the morning warmer. "Happy New Year," he echoed, voice rasped with sleep. "You beat the fireworks." "We had different fireworks," she said, and their eyes met with the quiet knowledge of people who had stood in a threshold and seen something cross. The paper star Oliver had left on the coffee table lay pale and ordinary in the daylight, though when Emma set her palm over it, she felt a ghost of warmth. Maybe it was her imagination. Maybe it was memory behaving itself for once. Lila padded in, wearing wool socks and a sweater the color of oatmeal. "It smells like a holiday," she said, sniffing the air. "Is that coffee?" "On it," Lucas said, standing, the chair creaking in protest. He moved through the small kitchen as if he'd always been there, set the kettle, ground beans with a steadiness that calmed Emma's heartbeat. Star followed him like an apprentice. Emma cracked the window an inch. Outside, the world sang like glass. She thought of last night, of Oliver standing in the shimmer at the edge of the street, of how the light had pulsed like something alive, like a heartbeat you could hold. She thought of the words he'd said, "Thank you for believing, even when you didn't know you did. Do you think—" She began, unsure of the shape of the sentence. Lucas didn't make her finish. "I don't know what to call it," he said simply, "but I know it happened." Lila sat with her hands around the mug Lucas brought. "Most true things don't mind what we call them," she said. "They're busy being true." They ate toast and oranges at the small table, the sunlight climbing, the room warming in ordinary ways that felt like miracles anyway. When they finished, Emma put on her boots and a clean sweater, tucked the paper star into her coat pocket out of habit, and looked at Lucas. "Let's walk to the cafe," she said. "The town will want its coffee. And I think Mr. Whitaker will want help." Lila shooed them with a smile. "Go, I'll nap. Take Star so she can conduct neighborhood inspections." They stepped into streets that felt like new roads in an old map. The air was crisp enough to make lungs sting, but it tasted like beginnings. People emerged from houses, laughing at the brightness, shovels clanging in pleasant rhythm. Someone shouted, "Happy New Year!" to someone else, and the words bounced along the block and reached Emma like a generous rumor. At the Maple Brew, a small crowd had already gathered, the delivery drivers from last night, faces soft with relief. The couple with the baby asleep and pink-cheeked. Mrs. Barnaby in a knitted hat with a pom-pom that looked exactly like a cranberry. And at the center of the knot stood Mr. Whitaker, a king without a kingdom until Emma arrived with keys. "There she is," he said, hands flung skyward. "New Year's angel with a key ring." "I prefer barista with privileges," Emma said, shouldering past him to tilt the lock. She pushed the door open and the bell gave its bright, brave jingle. The cafe smelled like yesterday's coffee and tomorrow's stories. Inside, they did what people who are good at caring do. They repeated the actions that had worked. Lucas lit the candles because the power was still uncertain. Emma ran the machine until it coughed and then recovered. Mr. Whitaker stirred cocoa like a priest blessing a river. Star administered tail wags with clinical precision. By 8:30, the room hummed with a low-grade happiness. Mrs. Barnaby stationed herself at the tree by the window and, with the solemnity of a parliamentarian, announced that the tinsel had finally achieved parity. "We are now a fully lit democracy," she said, which made the delivery drivers clap. Between refills, Emma noticed two things at once: a line forming at the counter, and the folded newspaper under Mr. Dunn's arm. "Is that today's?" she asked, wiping her hands on a towel. "Brought it at dawn," he said, thumping it onto the counter with his earnest old man's gravity. "Listen here now. Page 1. Emma unfolded it, the paper crackling in that way that pulled childhood into the edges of her vision. Sundays with comics, school fundraisers, coupons tucked into aprons. The front page showed the plowed town green, an article about the storm and its kinder-than-expected ending. But below the fold, in the space in which the paper kept its small, fierce gems, there was a photograph that made her breath hitch. She was in it. Not posed, not caught ugly, not caught trying. She stood behind the counter in last night's sweater, hair loose from her hat, eyes steady in candlelight. On the glass behind her, how had Lucas caught that? Hung the reflection of a paper star glowing like an ember. The caption read, "The Light on Maple Street." The byline belonged to a staff photographer who had probably been home asleep while Lucas was here doing the work of noticing. "It's—" Emma began, and then stopped because the word she wanted was too big. She traced the outline of the light with her fingertip. It should have been a trick of exposure, a flare, a glitch of the lens. Looked like truth. "You're famous," Mr. Whitaker said, pretending to be annoyed. "I'll have to raise your wages to keep the paparazzi at bay." "You could just raise them for other reasons," Emma said, and he grunted in a way that promised a New Year's negotiation. Lucas had drifted up beside her, mild in the small victory of seeing an image land on paper. He tipped his head to scan the print. "They cropped out the sleeping dog," he said. Rude Philistines, Emma said. She glanced at him, found him looking at her instead of the photograph. There was something unguarded in his gaze, the way the sky looks after the storm's done shouting. What? She asked, suddenly shy. Nothing, he said. Then, everything. Before she could ask him to translate, the bell over the door chimed and ushered in a gust of cold, and a string of neighbors, and, behind them, the pastor from the church, hair still wet from his own shoveling. He stepped into the warm and held his hands toward the ceiling the way some people hold them toward God. We're organizing a potluck at the hall, he said. For anyone who needs hot food and company, noon. Spread the word. We'll send coffee, Mr. Whitaker said. And Emma, voluntold again, she muttered. And the pastor winked at her in a way that made her love the town harder than she meant to. Around 10, when the morning had become a tide, and Emma had found a rhythm inside it, Lucas placed 2 photographs on the counter. Not screens, prints. He must have begged, charmed, or bribed the newspaper office for them. One was the image from page 1. The other showed the cafe half-lit, faces bent toward cups, the curve of a sleeping dog and a boy's empty stool in the corner like a hinge between 2 sentences. For the wall, he said. Emma framed the first behind the counter, near the tip jar. It wasn't vanity. It was witness. People came to order and reached past their own words to touch the glass. The way you touch the statue of a saint you don't believe in but respect anyway. The room took its cue and shifted. The Maple Brew became less a shop, and more a small church in which the ritual was caffeine, and the sermon was "We are not alone." At noon the cafe went portable. They filled air pots with coffee and cocoa, stacked paper cups, pushed sugar packets into their pockets. Mr. Whitaker stayed to mind the loyal. Emma and Lucas carried what they could, and a small procession followed them down Maple to the church hall. Star trotting like a marshal of ceremonies, her ears perfect flags. If the town had seemed scrubbed clean that morning, the parish hall gave it back its color. Crockpots lined the tables like a chorus line of sensible dancers. Chili, macaroni, something labeled Mabel's Miracle Stew, that turned out to be ordinary vegetables transfigured by the context of kindness. Children peeled off boots in clumsy triumph. An old couple held hands at a card table as if the thing might float away if they didn't tether it with touch. Emma worked exactly the way she liked to work, without thinking about working. She poured coffee until her arm ached, bumped elbows and apologized and was apologized to, laughed when a student she recognized from summer jobs tried to tip her with a coupon for discounted bowling. Lucas moved among the tables with his camera mostly resting on his chest. When he did lift it, he did it the way you lift a blessing, slowly, unintrusively, prefaced by his eyes seeking permission. Halfway through the meal, the mayor, a woman whose power suit looked borrowed from a warmer city, tapped a spoon against a glass and made a small speech about resilience. Emma heard the words and also the noise behind them, the good noise of forks on plates and children making up rules for games that didn't need them. When the mayor raised her glass and said, "To Maple Falls," the room raised back, styrofoam and paper and ceramic and plastic, and for a second, the whole town drank in unison. On the way back to the cafe, the sky had taken on the particular blue that means the day is thinking about finishing what it started. Lucas walked beside Emma, his gloved hand so close to hers that their knuckles almost touched. Star found a stick and decided it was a baton she alone could conduct the parade with. Emma wanted to say something about the photograph, the newspaper, the way her name felt different in her mouth today, the way the paper star warmed her left pocket. Instead, she said, "I forgot to fix that last strand of tinsel." Lucas laughed. "There will always be one more strand of tinsel. Is that a blessing or a curse? Depends on whether you've got a step stool." When they reached the cafe, a small cluster stood by the window, noses practically pressed to the glass. Emma thought at first they were admiring the newspaper photo she'd pinned up. Then she saw where they were looking. At the paper star she'd taped to the corner of the window, Oliver's star, the one that had glowed last night and returned to its obedient paper this morning. Now it glowed again, not in a fireworks way, not in a way that would make the paper send a van. It just lifted its light a shade above the daylight, a small gold that made the window pane look briefly like the inside of a lantern. Children saw it first. Children are tuned to frequencies we forget, and then they tugged their parents' sleeves, and the parents made the sound adults make when something threatens to turn them into children in a good way. Emma stood very still. The warmth in her pocket, her own star, bloomed against her palm. She slid her hand around it, not to hide it, but to feel its truth. How? Mr. Whitaker whispered just behind her shoulder. Maybe it's just catching the sun, someone offered. From the north window, someone else said, practical and tender at the same time. Emma exhaled and felt the breath leave on a prayer that was not about explanation. Let it be, she said softly, and the room all at once obeyed. No one touched the star. No one tried to wait it out for a trick. They simply let it shine until its shine had delivered its message, and then withdrawn into itself like a secret that knew when to be quiet. By late afternoon, the usual late December errands resumed their up-tempo. The plow laid down the last neat edge. The sun slipped toward the ridge the way a plate slips toward a sink, and as if on cue, the town slid from coffee to supper, from errands to early evenings, from we didn't think we could to we did. Emma wrote the new hours in chalk. New Year's Day, open until the stories run out. Then she left the sign exactly like that because she had learned that some jokes are truer than their straight-faced cousins. They closed just before 6. Mr. Whitaker did his small dance of pretending not to be proud of his shop, then shoved his hat on and left with a wave that meant everything he couldn't say without getting sentimental. Emma swept. Lucas stacked chairs on tables the way people do when they intend to stay in a place long enough to memorize its furniture. You don't have to, she said. I know, he said. I want to. It was the simplest version of the thing she needed to hear. She leaned the broom against the counter and took a breath that felt like a door opening. Are you going back to New York tomorrow? He drew a line on the fogged window with his finger, then wiped it clean with his sleeve. I was supposed to. I had a list. Galleries, clients. Things you say yes to because your last yes is an ancestor who expects company. He turned to her. I don't want to, Emma, she waited. He stepped closer in the space you use when you mean to offer something without scaring it away. I want to stay, he said. Not as a tourist. Not as a guy who drops in, takes pictures, and leaves people mid-frame. I don't know what staying looks like yet, but I know the shape of it feels like this place. Like this room, like... He laughed, shook his head, abandoned the sentence and found another. Like you. The broom could have fallen and broken the moment. It didn't. Outside, the tree's half-lit stubbornness began its evening glow, a consonant that makes the word complete. Emma thought of the long arithmetic of the last year, the balancing, the fear, and of how some sums didn't make sense until you added the right number you'd been missing. My mother will bully you into eating soup regularly, she said, because she needed to say something that touched ground before she said something that flew. She will ask you to fix the hinge on the closet door and then call you a hero for doing it. I like soup, he said solemnly. And heroism. And, she added, heart picking up, I like when you're here. He smiled a smile that left his eyes vulnerable. Then we should practice that. They didn't kiss right then, not because they didn't want to, but because the story was writing a sentence with a comma, not a period. Instead, they stood there as the town lit itself, and together, looked at the paper star in the window as if it were a clock, and they were intentionally late for something that didn't matter. Back at the apartment, Lila had set the table with 3 bowls and a 4th on the floor. The soup was the kind that improves by keeping company with itself. So, she said lightly, handing Lucas a spoon, is the photographer staying for winter? Lucas glanced at Emma, then back at Lila. If you'll have me. Oh, honey, Lila said, rolling her eyes with theatrical affection. This house takes all strays. Ask the dog. Ask the paper stars. They ate. They told the small stories that always surround the big ones so the big ones don't get lonely. After, Emma stood at the window with the blinds tilted just enough to let the town in. Midnight was still a rumor, hours away, but the day had carried the feeling of a threshold. She took the paper star from her pocket and held it against the glass. Thank you, she said to the window, to the star, to the place where a boy had stood and reminded the world of itself. Something shifted in the corner of her eye. She looked down into the street and saw, briefly, what might have been footprints. Small, sure, pointing not toward a house or a road, but toward the sky the way water points downstream. She blinked and they were gone. The glass held only her reflection and the echo of her own softness. Later, after Lila slept and Star dream-barked at merciful squirrels, Emma and Lucas stepped out onto the stoop. The town breathed. The sky was so clear that stars had multiplied past counting. They wore their coats and, for a moment, their silence, and then Lucas said, "I want to make something here." "You already did," she said, thinking of the photo, the paper. "The faces in the cafe." "I mean with you," he said, not shy now, just accurate. "Pictures, yes. A life, too." She felt the words land and take their seats in a row with the other truths of the day. "Okay," she said. "Let's." He reached for her hand. The first kiss happened in the hallway between Old and New Year's, unremarkable to anyone passing, except the two people who had been waiting to be remarkable to each other. It didn't announce itself with trumpets. It didn't need to. It was as quiet and certain as a paper star deciding to glow. They went inside before their ears turned to ice. Emma placed her star on the lamp beside the couch, and because she could, because the night was built for it, made a wish without words. When midnight finally came, it didn't arrive with clamor. The town counted in living rooms and fell upon couches and texted friends in other time zones that always surprised them. A few fireworks popped on the far ridge like punctuation marks flung by an enthusiastic copy editor. In the Rose apartment, the lamp gave up its light, and the radiator sang its tired lullaby, and the paper star on the table lifted its glow just enough to kiss the room with gold. Emma slept with her palm open, as if it were holding snow it didn't want to melt. Lucas slept with his camera on the chair and his future on the other chair. Lila slept with the smile of a woman who had seen a dark road and chosen the well-lit one. Morning, proper morning, New Year's Day, no longer brand new, brought a knock at the door. Emma, hair a riot, opened it to find Mr. Dunn with a plant in a cracked ceramic pot. "For luck," he said. "And oxygen. We'll need both." On the walk down to the cafe, the town wouldn't let the Maple Brew stay closed today, even if it had tried. Emma paused at the park. The tree stood with civic modesty. The bench where she had found Oliver wore a bright thin cap of ice that glittered like a name tag. Emma sat for a moment, ignoring the cold that bit through denim, and touched the paper star in her pocket. "You'll always have a home here," she said to the air. She wasn't sure if she meant Oliver, the past herself, or the miracle that had come like a boy with a dog and left like a story that had fulfilled its promise. The wind ran a gentle comb through the pine and answered in the language trees use with the people who will listen. By the time she reached the cafe, Lucas had already flipped the sign to open. On the window, beside the newspaper clipping, hung two paper stars now, side by side, their points not quite symmetrical, their light occasional and for that reason perfect. A hand-lettered note beneath them read, "If you need a miracle, ask for coffee first." Then look up. People did. They asked for coffee. They looked up. Some said they saw the glow. Some said they saw only their own faces in the glass, and that was enough. After all, recognizing yourself on a good day is a small miracle, too. Emma worked until her hands forgot they were tired. At some point in the swing, she found Lucas watching her the way he had that first morning, except now the look had a home to live in. He lifted his camera, then lowered it. "Take it," she said, laughing. You'll regret it, and then you'll blame me. And then we'll have our first fight, and I refuse to have our first fight about your art." So he did. He took the picture. He put it in a file he would name later something earnest and uncool and true. And when an email arrived that afternoon from a gallery asking for prints, he typed back, "Yes, but I won't be back for a while. I'm working on something here that matters more." He hit send and felt not empty but complete. That evening, after the last cup was washed and the last chair turned, they stood together in the doorway and looked out. The street wore lights like jewelry it had inherited and was learning to love. The paper star was quiet for now. The miracle had done its work and was resting, the way even miracles must. "Do you think it will glow again?" Lucas asked, his shoulder soft against hers. Emma thought of Oliver's hands careful in their folding, of the way wisdom had looked so easily at home in an 8-year-old's eyes. "When it needs to," she said. They pulled the door closed and walked home through a town that had learned again how to make light. On Maple Street, snow surrendered its addition to the plows, and the park, already scuffed by sleds, waited for tomorrow's children. Somewhere, someone made soup. Somewhere else, someone paid an overdue bill with a relief that tasted like forgiveness. And on a quiet sill in a small apartment, 2 paper stars, one in the window, one on the lamp, held the memory of their own brightness like a promise. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that keeps showing up. The kind that says, "When the quiet gets too loud, light will remember where to land."